They taught you to wait for someone, one person, a single soul in the entire world that would complete what is missing in you. They sold you this idea as love, as destiny, as divine grace, and you accepted it. You spent years, maybe decades, searching for that external reflection of yourself while, deep inside, the most sacred part of your existence remained fragmented, silent, imprisoned. But what no one ever told you is this. The concept of the soulmate, as you know it, was not born from spiritual wisdom. It was born from the most sophisticated trap ever constructed against human consciousness. There is a text that was buried, hunted, and systematically erased from collective memory for centuries. It was discovered inside a clay jar in the Egyptian desert, in Nag Hammadi, in 1945. Its name is the Gospel of Philip, and inside it lies a passage that silently destroys everything institutional religion ever built about love, relationships, and the nature of the soul. It is not metaphor. It is not mystical poetry. It is a precise technical instruction for the most radical operation a human being can perform upon themselves. They called it the ritual of the bridal chamber, and the reason you have never heard of it with any clarity is the exact same reason you still feel incomplete. We begin at the most painful point, because it is the only way to truly wake up. Have you noticed the pattern? That feeling of finding the right person, followed inevitably by collapse, the exhaustion, that hollow sensation after separation that is far too vast to be simple longing, the repetition of the same types of relationships, as if you are magnetically pulled toward the same wound wearing a different face. This is not bad luck. This is not karma in the popular sense. This is the precise functioning of a structure that benefits directly from your fragmentation. In the Gnostic texts, this structure has a name, the Archons. They are not abstract mythological figures. They are patterns of force that operate upon fragmented consciousness, and they feed with an efficiency that most modern spiritual traditions have never dared to describe with this level of precision. Look around you. Pay attention to how your energy moves when you are in the grip of longing for another person. That restlessness at 3 in the morning, that compulsive reaching for someone who is no longer there, that sensation, almost physical, of something being drained from the center of your chest. You are not experiencing emotion in those moments. You are experiencing extraction. The soulmate narrative is perfect for this system. It keeps you looking outward. It keeps you in a constant state of energetic dependency upon another being. It keeps you locked in a cycle of attraction, fusion, depletion, and separation. A cycle that generates enormous quantities of emotional energy that bleeds from your field like light from a shattered lamp. The Demiurge, that figure the Gnostics described as the architect of the illusory world, does not need to chain you with physical restraints. He only needs to convince you that your wholeness lives somewhere else, in someone else's eyes, in someone else's hands. And the Church understood this, not by accident. The suppression of the Gnostic texts at the Council of Nicaea was not merely a theological dispute. It was a consciousness control operation. Because the teachings Philip recorded teachings he attributed directly to the living Christ, not the mythological Christ manufactured by the Church Fathers, those teachings revealed something that made the human being spiritually self-sufficient. And a self-sufficient being needs no intermediaries, no confession, no penance, no submission to any power structure that charges admission to your own liberation. What was hidden inside the bridal chamber is not a sexual ritual. It is not an external ceremony. It is something far more threatening to the system of control. It is the spiritual technology that unifies the two halves of your own monad, the original spark of light that you are, before any material illusion. And there is a precise reason why this unification was forbidden, ridiculed, and branded as heresy. Because when it occurs inside you, something happens at the energetic level that renders you literally invisible to the archonic patterns that operate upon ordinary consciousness. You disappear from the radar of the spiritual matrix. But before the hidden code behind this ritual can be revealed, what Philip's text truly describes in its deepest layers, you must first understand what was done to the concept of syzygy, because it is precisely there that the greatest erasure took place. And what they removed from that single word changes everything you think you know about love, about duality, and about the reason you came to this plane at all. Expand Part 2, the hidden code plus the escalation of revelation. Target minutes of narration. Syzygy, hold that word for a moment. Let it sit in your mind before you try to understand it intellectually. It comes from ancient Greek and means, in its most literal translation, conjugate pair, two elements existing in a relationship of complementary tension, like two poles of the same force that cannot exist without each other. The Gnostics used this concept to describe the fundamental architecture of divine reality itself. The Pleroma, the state of absolute fullness, the realm of pure light that exists beyond all material illusion, was not a singular, uniform presence. It was composed of pairs, eons, cosmic forces that existed always in syzygy, in perfect polar union. And then something broke. Sophia Wisdom acted alone, without her masculine counterpart, without her syzygy. She reached beyond the boundary of her own nature, and in that solitary movement generated the Demiurge, generated the illusion, generated the world you are living in right now. You are not experiencing existence in a neutral plane. You are experiencing the consequence of a primordial rupture in a divine pair. And until that rupture is repaired, not out there, not in another person, but inside the structure of your own consciousness, the cycle does not end. This is not mythology, this is a map. Now pay very close attention to what the Gospel of Philip actually says about the bridal chamber, because the translations that circulate in popular spiritual spaces have been systematically flattened. In Greek, the specific word Philip uses for the bridal chamber is nymphon, and in the initiatory context of the early Gnostic communities, this word did not refer to a physical wedding space. It was the technical term for an altered state of consciousness, a state of interior fusion. A threshold that, once crossed, permanently changed the energetic signature of the being who crossed it. Philip writes with a precision that is almost clinical. Those who are anointed in this chamber become free and untouchable. Untouchable. In the Aramaic oral tradition from which these teachings descended before they were ever written down, the word carrying that meaning was not about physical immunity. It was about vibrational impermeability. The initiated being no longer resonated at the frequencies the Archons could grip. It was not protection in the way a shield is protection. It was invisibility. You cannot feed from what you cannot find. Consider for a moment what this means in practical terms for your daily existence. Every pattern of archonic influence operates through a frequency anchor, a recurring emotional state that functions as a homing signal. Chronic longing is one of the most powerful of these anchors. It is not coincidental that the most commercially successful industries on this planet are built entirely around the amplification of longing. The longing for a perfect body, the longing for the perfect relationship, the longing for a life that always exists just slightly beyond where you currently are. You are being kept in a permanent state of reaching, and everything you pour into that reaching, every night of sleeplessness, every spiral of obsessive thought, every moment of that hollow ache in the center of your chest, that is not your pain. That is your energy leaving your field on a frequency that has been precisely tuned to be harvested. The ritual of the bridal chamber begins with the recognition of this mechanism, not as guilt. The concept of guilt is itself an archonic construction, a way to keep you contracted, small, focused on your own unworthiness rather than on the actual technology of liberation. The recognition the ritual demands is purely technical. The way a navigator recognizes that the compass has been tampered with before recalibrating the entire course. What Philip describes in the deeper layers of the bridal chamber text is a process of internal polarity integration. Every human consciousness carries within it both a solar principle and a lunar principle, what the ancient traditions variously called the masculine and feminine currents of the monad. These are not gender identities. They are not personality traits. They are fundamental vibrational architectures. The solar current moves outward. It generates, projects, initiates. The lunar current moves inward. It receives, gestates, reflects. In a consciousness that has been systematically conditioned by the material world, these two currents do not communicate. They operate in separation, each one amplifying the fragmentation that keeps the Archons fed. You feel this separation every time you oscillate between two irreconcilable internal states, the impulse to push forward and the paralysis that swallows it, the hunger for connection and the terror of dissolving into another person, the clarity that arrives in solitary moments and vanishes the instant external pressure appears. That oscillation is not a personal flaw. It is the signature of an unresolved interior syzygy. What the bridal chamber ritual actually describes, beneath the ceremonial language, beneath the layers of initiatory code that Philip uses to protect this knowledge from those who would destroy it, is a method of bringing these two currents into direct contact within the same field of consciousness. Not in sequence, not in alternation, simultaneously. The moment of their meeting, their genuine interior contact, is what the text calls the anointing. And the text is explicit about what this contact produces. A being who is no longer subject to the ordinary mechanisms of spiritual imprisonment, because the very architecture that made imprisonment possible, the interior split, the longing for an external completion, has been dissolved from the inside. Now here is what was deliberately removed from every mainstream transmission of this knowledge. The sexual energy, what the ancient traditions called pneuma, the breath force, the vital current, is not incidental to this process. It is the medium through which the two interior currents make contact. Every authentic Gnostic initiatory school understood this. The suppression of this understanding was not prudishness. It was strategy. Because a being who understands how to work consciously with their own vital force, who understands how to redirect that current inward toward the point of interior union, rather than constantly outward toward another body, another source of completion, that being has access to a quality of energy that does not deplete, that does not bleed into archonic frequencies, that does not respond to the homing signals of longing and lack. This is why the texts were buried, not because they were obscene, because they were too precise, too operational. A religion built on the management of spiritual hunger cannot survive in a world where the hunger has been resolved. But understanding this intellectually changes almost nothing, because there is a specific error, an error that operates almost universally in everyone who approaches this knowledge for the first time, that ensures the bridal chamber remains locked even for those who have found the map. An error so subtle that it looks, from the outside, exactly like spiritual progress. Most people who discover the ritual of the bridal chamber make the same fatal mistake at the threshold. They take the most powerful key ever hidden from human consciousness, and they use it to build a more sophisticated cage. What that error is, and how it operates in the astral field, is what everything has been leading toward. Expand Part 3, the energetic climax plus liberation reflection. Target: minutes of narration. The fatal error is this: using the knowledge of internal union to become a better seeker of external union. It sounds almost too simple to be the thing that stops people, but watch how it operates in practice. Someone encounters the Gnostic teachings. They begin to understand the concept of syzygy. They grasp, intellectually, that the completion they have been searching for exists within their own field of consciousness. And then, almost immediately, almost automatically, the conditioned mind performs a subtle hijack. It takes the new language and folds it back into the old architecture. Suddenly, they are not looking for a soulmate. They are looking for a spiritually awakened partner who mirrors their own inner masculine and feminine. The cage has been repainted. The Archon has adapted. The frequency of longing, which was the homing signal all along, has not changed at all. It has simply acquired a more sophisticated vocabulary. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is the precision of the system. The demiurgic architecture does not fear spiritual knowledge. It fears spiritual completion. Knowledge can be absorbed, repackaged, monetized, turned into a new form of seeking. Completion cannot be monetized. It cannot be managed. A being who has genuinely entered the bridal chamber, who has brought the two interior currents of their monad into living contact, does not produce the energetic signature that the system requires. There is nothing to grip, nothing to harvest. The homing signal has gone silent. Feel what that actually means for a moment, not as a concept, as a physical reality. That chronic background tension you have carried for so long that you have stopped recognizing it as tension, that low-frequency hum of not quite enough, of something perpetually missing, of a shape inside you that has never been filled, that is the signature of the interior split. That is what it feels like to be a syzygy that has never been resolved. And most people live their entire incarnation inside that frequency, mistaking it for the human condition, never suspecting that it is a constructed state with a specific architect and a specific purpose. The monad, your original spark, the aspect of consciousness that descended into material existence carrying the full memory of the Pleroma, arrived here complete. The fragmentation did not happen at birth. It happened progressively, through the accumulated pressures of a world specifically designed to keep the two interior currents from ever recognizing each other. Every system of social conditioning, every architecture of reward and shame, every narrative about what it means to be a man or a woman, a success or a failure, loved or unworthy, these were not arbitrary cultural developments. They were, in the Gnostic understanding, the operational layer of the material prison, the means by which the interior syzygy is kept perpetually unresolved. What the ritual of the bridal chamber restores is not something that was lost. It restores awareness of something that was always present but made inaccessible. The solar current and the lunar current within your field of consciousness have never actually separated. They cannot separate. They are both expressions of the same monadic light. What happened is that your attention was trained, systematically and from the earliest possible age, to oscillate between them rather than resting in their point of contact. The ritual is not a creation. It is a remembering, a return to a frequency that the noise of the material world was designed to drown out completely. Now consider what changes when that contact is restored, not in theory, in the texture of daily existence. The archonic frequencies, longing, chronic dissatisfaction, the compulsive need for external validation, the terror of solitude, the exhaustion that descends for no physical reason in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, these frequencies require a fragmented receiver to operate. They are broadcast constantly. They will continue to be broadcast. But a consciousness that has resolved its interior syzygy does not receive them the same way a grounded electrical circuit does not accumulate static charge. The signal passes through without anchoring, without creating the spike of reactive emotion that generates the energetic harvest. This is what Philip meant by untouchable, not invulnerable in the sense of incapable of feeling. The Gnostic path was never about emotional anesthesia. That is a distortion introduced by traditions that confused liberation with detachment. Untouchable means the archonic patterns can no longer find the specific frequency in your field that they were designed to grip. You feel. You engage with the world completely. You love with a quality of presence that the longing-based model of love never produced, because you are no longer loving from depletion, from the desperate need to fill an interior hollow. You are loving from fullness, from a field that replenishes itself because it is no longer hemorrhaging energy through the wound of unresolved duality. The texts describe this state with a word that has been consistently mistranslated in every mainstream rendering of the Gospel of Philip. The word is koinonia, usually rendered as communion in a vague, religious sense that strips it of all operative meaning. In the initiatory context, koinonia described the specific quality of consciousness that emerges from genuine interior union. It is not a feeling. It is a structural change in the way the monad interfaces with the material plane. The being in koinonia is still fully present in the world, still subject to time, to physical limitation, to the ordinary textures of human experience. But they are no longer subject to the architecture of spiritual imprisonment, because that architecture was built entirely on the assumption of interior fragmentation, and the fragmentation is no longer there to build on. This is the inheritance the buried texts were trying to preserve, not a doctrine, not a belief system to replace the one that was suppressing it, a technology, a precise, operational, transmittable method for completing the one process that the entire material world was constructed to interrupt. And it was buried not because it was dangerous to the individual who practiced it, but because it was dangerous to every structure of power that had ever been built on the management of human spiritual incompleteness. You came to this plane carrying something that no Archon can manufacture and no demiurgic architecture can replicate, the memory of your own wholeness. It was not taken from you. It was buried under layers of noise so dense and so relentless that most beings spend their entire incarnation believing the noise is the signal. But the bridal chamber was always there, inside the architecture of your own consciousness, waiting not for the right person to arrive and open it, but for you to stop looking outward long enough to find the door. The Gospel of Philip was buried in the desert for nearly 2,000 years. The jar that held it was sealed so tightly that the texts survived almost perfectly intact, as if whoever placed them there understood that the time was not yet right. As if they were waiting for a specific kind of seeker, not one who was satisfied with the surface layer of spiritual knowledge, but one who felt, with a certainty deeper than any argument could produce, that the official version of reality was missing something essential, something that had been deliberately removed, something that, once recovered, would change not just what they believed but what they were. If you are watching this, you already know what that feeling is. The religious system hid the most powerful part of this teaching to keep you reaching outward, to keep you manageable, incomplete, dependent. If you recognize that the completion you have been searching for was never in another person's hands, seal that recognition with a like. And leave a comment telling me which cage held you longest, the soulmate myth, the spiritual seeking loop, or something else entirely. Because what Philip recorded in that hidden chamber goes even deeper than what was revealed here today. There is a specific practice, a sequence of interior movements described in the original Aramaic transmission, that activates the koinonia state directly, without years of preparation. And it begins with something so simple that the mind immediately dismisses it as insufficient. That is precisely why it works.